In a world that moves too fast, we're often told to mind our own business, to keep our heads down, stick to our lane, and protect what little we have. James Miller understood that better than most. His world was one of long hours and quiet observation, a universe contained within the polished marble floors and silent glass doors of the Northgate Financial Tower. As a night shift security guard, he was a ghost in a machine, paid to see everything and react to nothing. But on a cold Tuesday night, under the unforgiving hum of fluorescent lights, James saw something he couldn't ignore. In the corner of the deserted public atrium, a woman sat hunched on a bench, her shoulders trembling. She wasn't loud. In fact, her sorrow was so quiet it was almost invisible. A few late-working executives in expensive suits hurried past her, their eyes locked on their phones, completely oblivious. James watched her on the security monitor, a silent drama unfolding in black and white. His job was to report disturbances, to keep the peace. But this wasn't a disturbance. It was something far more fragile. It was a person unraveling in a place where no one seemed to care. He knew the rules. Don't get involved. But a question started to echo in his mind, a question that would change his life forever. In a world full of people, how could someone be so alone? James Miller wasn't a man who had ever known luxury. At 58 years old, his life was a testament to quiet resilience. A former factory worker laid off when the plant moved overseas. He'd taken the security job a decade ago to make ends meet. It wasn't a career. It was a necessity. His wife, Sarah, had passed from cancer 3 years prior, and the medical bills had eaten through their savings like a wildfire. Now, he lived in a small apartment 2 bus rides away, his only companion, a scruffy terrier named Gus. His life was measured in small increments: the price of coffee, the cost of a bus pass, the number of hours until his shift ended. He wasn't bitter. James had a fundamental belief, instilled in him by his parents, that your character wasn't defined by the money in your pocket, but by the kindness in your heart. It was a principle that felt increasingly outdated in the cold, transactional world of the financial tower. He'd seen million-dollar deals celebrated with champagne in the lobby, and he'd also seen people step over a homeless man sleeping on the grate outside without a second glance. The woman on the bench was a stark contrast to this environment. She wore a simple dress, neat but not expensive. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap they were white-knuckled. He'd seen her come in about an hour ago, looking nervous, checking her phone. Now its screen was dark on the bench beside her. James's training told him she might be a risk, a trespasser, but his heart told him something different. He recognized the look in her eyes from a memory he'd tried to keep buried, the look of utter helplessness he'd seen on his own wife's face in the hospital, the look of someone who had just received the worst news of their life. He made his rounds, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Each time he passed the atrium, she was still there. People continued to ignore her. A couple laughed loudly as they exited the elevator, wrapped up in their own world. It was as if she was in a bubble of grief that no one else could see. James felt a growing unease, a conflict between his professional duty and his basic humanity. The rule book was clear, but the look on her face was clearer. Another hour crawled by. The rain outside turned into a downpour, lashing against the glass walls of the atrium. The last of the office workers had finally trickled out, leaving the vast space feeling even more desolate. It was just James and the crying woman now. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by her soft, muffled sobs. James stood at his desk, pretending to review paperwork, but his attention was fixed on the small, grainy image on his monitor. He thought about his own finances. He had exactly $24 in his wallet. It was supposed to last him until his paycheck cleared on Friday. That money was earmarked for his groceries, for Gus's dog food, for the co-pay on his blood pressure medication. Every single dollar had a job to do. Getting involved was a luxury he couldn't afford. What could he even do? Offering a kind word felt empty, and calling for assistance might just get her thrown out into the storm. He watched as she finally moved. She reached for her phone, her hand shaking. The screen lit up her face and he saw her flinch, a fresh wave of grief washing over her. She swiped at the screen, then put it back down with a sense of finality. She buried her face in her hands, her despair so palpable it felt like a physical weight in the room. That was the moment something snapped in James. He remembered a night, years ago, when his car had broken down on the highway in a snowstorm. He'd sat there for hours, cars speeding past, feeling invisible, forgotten. Then an old tow truck driver had pulled over, given him a blanket, and shared a thermos of hot coffee, refusing to take a dime for it. Some nights, you're the one in the ditch. Other nights, you're the one with the rope, the driver had said. You just got to be ready to throw it. James looked from the woman on the monitor to the small 24-hour cafe that was part of the tower's public space. Its lights were a beacon of warmth in the cold lobby. He looked at the $24 in his wallet. It wasn't much, but maybe tonight it was the rope. He made a decision, protocol and procedure be damned. He walked out from behind his desk, his heart pounding a little faster. He felt a sense of transgression, of breaking the primary rule of his job, to be a shadow. As he approached her, he rehearsed what he would say, terrified of making things worse. Her head was still in her hands. She didn't hear him coming. He cleared his throat softly, not wanting to startle her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice gentle. The woman looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and startled. She seemed to shrink into herself, as if expecting to be scolded or told to leave. I'm sorry," she stammered, trying to wipe away her tears. "I'll go." No, you're not in any trouble," James said quickly, holding up a hand. It's a cold night, and you look like you could use something warm." He hesitated, feeling awkward. "I was just heading over to the cafe. Can I get you something? A coffee? A sandwich?" "On me." She stared at him, bewildered. In a world that had just turned her life upside down, in a place that had shown her nothing but indifference, this stranger in a security uniform was offering kindness. She shook her head, as if unable to process it. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't," James said with a small, sad smile. "But I'd like to." He didn't wait for an answer. He walked over to the cafe, ordered a hot tomato soup, a grilled cheese sandwich and a cup of tea, paying with the $20 bill from his wallet. The cashier gave him a strange look, but James didn't care. He carried the tray back to the bench and set it down gently. "Here," he said, "please, at least the tea." She looked at the food, then back at him, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. But this time it was different. It wasn't a tear of despair. It was a tear of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She picked up the cup of tea, her hands still shaking, and held its warmth. They sat in silence for a few minutes as she ate, the simple act of eating seeming to ground her. Just as she was finishing, the glass doors of the atrium slid open with a soft whoosh. A man in a tailored dark suit strode in, his face a mask of worry. He was older, with graying temples, and he scanned the atrium frantically until his eyes landed on the woman. "Eleanor!" he cried out, relief washing over his features. He rushed to her side. "My God, I was so worried. Your phone went straight to voicemail. The hospital called me." He knelt beside her, taking her hands. Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes filling with tears again. "Robert, the news. It was too much." "I know, my love. I know," he said softly, stroking her hair. It was only then that he seemed to notice James, standing a respectful distance away. He saw the empty tray, and a flicker of confusion crossed his face. He looked at James, then at his wife, then back at James. "This man," Eleanor said, her voice finding a bit of strength. He bought me dinner, Robert. He was kind to me when I felt like the world was ending. Robert Sterling stood up. James braced himself, expecting to be questioned, or perhaps even reprimanded for interacting with the man's wife. But Robert didn't look angry. He looked humbled. He looked at James's uniform, at his worn shoes, and then into his eyes. "You work here?" Robert asked, his voice quiet but carrying an immense authority. "Yes, sir. Night shift security," James replied. Robert Sterling extended a hand. "My name is Robert Sterling. Eleanor is my wife." The name clicked in James's mind. Robert Sterling wasn't just a man in a suit. He was the owner of Sterling Industries, the multi-billion-dollar corporation that owned this entire building and half the skyline around it. This was the man who unknowingly signed his paychecks. James stood frozen for a second, shaking the hand of one of the richest men in the country. Robert Sterling held his gaze, his expression one of profound sincerity. "My wife and we just came from the hospital. We received some difficult news about our daughter's health. Eleanor was supposed to wait for me here while I got the car. She was devastated." He let go of James's hand and looked at the tray. "I have more money than I could spend in 100 lifetimes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm surrounded by people who want something from me. But when my wife was at her lowest, alone in a building that has my name on it, they all walked past her, but you didn't. You, a man who probably has to count every dollar, you showed her a kindness that no amount of money can buy." He reached into his pocket but then stopped. He looked at James again. "What's your name?" "James Miller, sir." "James," Robert Sterling said, a decision forming on his face. "A simple thank you isn't enough. A check isn't enough." The next morning, James received a call. It wasn't a job offer, it was a partnership. Robert Sterling had created a new charitable foundation, funded with millions of dollars, aimed at providing comfort and aid to families navigating medical crises. And he wanted James Miller, the night shift security guard, to run it. James's small act of kindness didn't just change his life, it restored a powerful man's faith in humanity. It proved that in a world of glass towers and fleeting fortunes, the most valuable currency we have is compassion. It's a quiet reminder that you never know what battle someone is fighting, and sometimes a simple cup of tea can be the rope that pulls someone back from the edge. What matters isn't what you have, but what you're willing to give.